Hello. In this session, we look at administration in education. In specifically, we'll be focusing on administration of nurse training institutions. What are objectives of today? One, we want to contextualize administration of nurse training institutions. We want to describe briefly the application of functions of management to training institutions. We want to describe factors that influence take-up of administrative roles by nurse educators, and we want to describe ways in which nurse educators can be supported to take up administrative roles of nurse training institution. Let's look at what is happening in the field of administration of nurse training institutions. There is a lot of changing patterns of nurse training. How nurses are trained has changed within the last couple of years, the last decade. We have different training modalities. Unlike the traditional ways where we just used to sit and have face-to-face training and then we take you to the clinical areas, a lot has changed. We have use of technology in training nurses. So informatics is as being just nurses using computers, but has shifted to clinical intelligence. Nurse training institutions require leadership, and that leadership is the one which directs the training institutions. Often, the directors or the managers of training institutions are usually clinicians who have been given overlapping roles in management, teaching, research, and provision of clinical services. It is rare that you have somebody who just sits and just trained on how to run a nursing college, for example. So more often than not, we have change of roles. That manager, that nurse administrator who has been given multiple responsibilities, then has potential for stress and may be demotivated. Apart from that, there's a lot of change in organizational structures, especially in this COVID era. There's a lot of restructuring. And that change in organizational structure either means the nurse administrator of training institutions has to adapt. If not, then they may become obsolete. In the whole of that complexity, dynamism of the training environment, it means that the nurse administrator must be equipped with complex skills and knowledge in order to succeed in their role. Surprising, most nurse managers or administrators who are running training institutions will tell you that they actually found themselves on that role accidentally. Some have been trained on job training by prior administrators or deans. Others have actually been appointed, and there is often no option of declining that appointment. That happens especially in training institutions in developing economies. And so, should you find yourself in the administration position in a nurse training institution, in a nutshell, what are some of the things you need to crack? You need to remember that training institutions expect the nurse administrator to manage her department. That nurse administrator also manages teaching management. In other words, you are focusing on the nursing course activities. There's also the role of institutional management, because the small department or the small school you're leading or you're managing in an institution is linked to the larger institution. If you're working in a university, for example, probably that nursing department is hosted within a faculty of health. If you're training in a mid-level college, for example, Kenya Medical Training Institute, you operate within the context of the larger training institution. So apart from managing the institutional linkages, the nurse administrator is also expected to be the link to national and global networks. For a nurse manager or administrator to lead in education, then they need to be keen about situational analysis. You're not only analyzing the global environment, the local environment, you're also looking at the role of schools of nursing. Remember, those nursing schools operate in a very dynamic national and international realities. So the nurse lecturers often play the role of policy drivers. They develop strategies for implementation of national guidelines. They also partake of development of the lecturer and practitioner administrator role, which acts as a bridge between education and practice. So you're not only managing the institution, you're also managing as a lecturer, as an educator, and of course, the registration body expects you to be in touch with your practice. So you actually do multiple roles. Then how are we going to function? How are we going to succeed as administrator of training institutions? We apply the old lovely role and functions of management. We talked about them previously, so we just skip through and see what is actually involved. One function of management is planning. If you're planning on how to run a training institution or nurse training institution, then more often than not you work with a board of management. That board of management is either appointed by the organization or it could be political appointees. We need to plan or look forward or ask ourselves how we're going to run the institution harmoniously. We plan by looking at the philosophy and objectives for educational programs. When we look at philosophy and objectives of educational programs, then it means we need to identify the present needs of the students, of the educational program, of the country, the global community. Then we need to investigate the resources available, evaluate them, and where possible, we need to secure those resources. Then we formulate the plan of action. We're able to select and organize learning experiences. We should participate in formulation of admission and recruitment policies, as we shall see further. In summary, when it comes to planning, we need to forecast and look into the future, and we can use the framework of the 4Ms. So we want to look at the requirements in terms of money. The budget for operations, we need to think what are current and recurrent expenditures, what are capital expenditures, what do we expect to be our direct and indirect expenditures. Can we do a budget? Can we identify sources of funding? Will it be the government funding? Will it require us to charge fees on the students we recruit? But we need to think about money and the future requirements for money. We also need to plan for materials. We have capital investment in materials. If you are running a department, you need to think about training materials, office materials, etc. And then we also plan for manpower. We think about recruitment of human resource. Who will teach our students? Who will be the faculty? Who will run the administrative functions? Are those positions filled by the larger institution? If you're running a school, an independent school, you need to think about that recruitment. Do you want full-time employees? Do you want adjunct employees? We also need to plan for time and moment. In nursing, we often draw the master rotation plan to aid us. That will show us where students will be placed. When are they in for theory? When are they in for practicals? Who are the appropriate staff for each part of the curriculum? And we also look at extracurricular activities. What about organizing? We organize using organizational structures. We need to determine the number of positions and scope and responsibility for each faculty and staff. We need to think about their job descriptions. We also want to analyze and prepare those job descriptions in line with authority, responsibility, relationship, and channels of communication. That is often dictated by the organizational chart. Then we want to ask, who will we delegate authority and responsibility to? We also maintain a plan of workload. And apart from reviewing both staff students ratio in nurse education, we also want to perform performance appraisal. Remember, even as we look at organizing and looking at the student staff ratio, we need to look at that in line with staffing. We have Commission of Higher Education, which has given guidelines, for example, into the staff-student ratios. The other thing is there is specific guideline on the expected qualifications of those who are charged with the responsibility of education. More often than not, college tutors and university lecturers are selected due to their successful performance as practitioners. When they come into the institutions, they are newcomers in many aspects of their roles. They've been practicing. They have not been sitting in class setting learning objectives. So that transition to higher education, or from practitioners to tutors, often has accompanying challenges. It can be confusing and it can cause a lot of tension in the new faculty, not only within themselves but also within their departments. There is often conflicting role between the original practitioner and a trainer or a lecturer. That means the facilitation of that adoption of new role need to be very robust. We have to make sure we have good mentoring systems, that we have specific preparation for mentors who will help these new faculty or new trainees develop a more positive culture of learning and training. Understaffing, we also recommend appointments and promotion, not only based on the qualifications of the staff, but also on their experiences and their performance. We also need to recognize the need for continuing education, not only for the nurse, manager, or administrator of the institution, but also for their staff. We also need to provide stimulation of opportunities for such development. One of the key roles of the nurse administrator is providing directions. So she's always directing. Once you've provided adequate orientation to staff members, then you need to guide and encourage staff members in their job activities. Remember, you're overlooking both faculty and non-academic members of staff. How do you direct them so that you're able to work harmoniously with them? Luckily, there are always established policies which guide administrative decisions. And more often than not, both academic and non-academic members of staff are involved in establishing those policies, and those policies are also what guides in designing educational programs that are sound. When we direct staff, especially academic members of staff, we want to provide some freedom for expression of creativity and innovation, even though that creativity and innovation should be within the framework of the curriculum. We need to encourage our staff to participate in research with the current evidence of or the current trend of evidence-based practice. We not only need to be knowledge generators, creators, but we also need to be absorbers of knowledge. In directing, we need to ensure that we guide in an environment that is of international standards. So should it be physical equipment requirement? Should it be software? Should it be soft skills? All of them need to be of international standards. The nurse administrator, who also doubles up as an educator, needs to be a good coordinator. Remember, coordination does not only run across other collaborative institutions, but the administrator needs to be the coordinator of internal affairs, administrative meetings, staff meetings, stakeholders, teachers meeting. That is her coordination role. He also coordinates various committees of curriculum, ethical, budgeting. They also coordinate various programs within the communities, whether it's outreach to the community, whether it is motivating staff and students to participate in various programs, nationally, internationally. That needs to be done in a harmonious way. There's also the important role of controlling. We control based on prior set standards. So, the prior set standards are often directed by accreditation bodies, the Nursing Council of Kenya, Commission of University Education, and other internationally recognized accreditation bodies. So we need to prepare, secure, approve, and have an administrative budget for controlling for us to meet national and international standards. We also need to ensure there is control of what happens in our areas of integration, especially in the clinical areas. It is the responsibility of the college or department administrator, nurse educator, to ensure that where the students are placed is in accordance with the recognized levels of training. You send or you place your student to institutions which have been accredited by the Nursing Council of Kenya, for example, in this country. The other function of management which the nurse educator cum administrator needs to play a big role in is communication management. Corporate communication is one key aspect of success of any training institution. The nurse administrator communicates both internally and externally. We have customers, internal customers, external customers. The administrator is charged with the responsibility of communicating with the government. That communication must be done in a professional way. In this era of technology, we need to think of how do we deal with controlled and uncontrolled technological communication. Social media. How will we run our social media platforms in a professional way? For you to succeed as an administrator, you need to do proactive communication. Don't wait until there is crisis for you to communicate. Scan your environment, anticipate the possible happenings. Design, formulate communication earlier in advance. Do you expect, for example, a number of students to be excommunicated from the college due to misbehavior? I hope it doesn't happen. But you need to think of how to communicate that prior to mass media taking an onslaught on you. Communication is not just about limited to exchange of information. We need to think about research, knowledge translation. We need to communicate about the research activities our institutions are carrying out, new innovations. We need to be able to communicate the same. We can only be able to communicate, especially fact-based, evidence-based communication, when we know how to do proper record management. We have many institutions which are going through ISO certification. That is an initiative we'll probably think about undertaking as a manager, as an administrator of a nurse training institution. Sounds quite mind-boggling, quite some fascinating responsibility to take up. But let's see, is it everybody who enjoys being an administrator of training institutions? Adam, in 2007, did a study in America and found that 63% of faculty could not consider a position with greater administrative responsibilities. Some of the reasons given were there's always higher workload expected with taking up administrative roles. There's also conflict of interest. That also happens in developing countries, especially in Kenya. Often than not, if you ask faculty members or tutors in training institutions who would want to be the chair of the department, for example, maybe 1 or 2%, maybe 10% would be interested. Reason, you end up with extra workload. And unfortunately, compensation for that responsibility is often very poor. Most managers feel the position puts them in conflict with students and other faculty members. Who wants to handle indiscipline among students and faculty members? And then once you take up administrative role, then it becomes an 8 to 5 job, 8-hour job, 5 days a week. That lack of flexibility can be a demotivator. It's not everybody who looks at it like that. There are those people who are actually willing to take up administrative role of training institutions. What are some of the reasons they have given as their motivators? One, there are those who love additional challenges. They want to have a variety of work. You don't want to be the classroom every day. You don't want to be the clinical area every day. There's also the opportunity to influence organization climate and opportunity to facilitate faculty growth. You want to be there as the advocate of your fellow colleagues. There is also the opportunity to maintain control within the unit. And of course, when you're in management, you're in a position to interact with wider networks within and without the institution. An interesting fact is that research has showed those with higher training are more likely to take up administrative roles. The challenge still remains the number of faculty who are willing to take up administrative role in training institutions is too small. So what can we do to encourage them? We need to provide leadership development opportunities for faculty, for practitioners, for those people with the dream of leading training institutions. There's a need to manage the workload. Administrative work is quite time consuming. And when trainers, educators are bogged up with management roles, they may not have enough time to prepare for their teaching role. So you would need probably to have a formula that if you're in management, then maybe you need to use 30% of your time in teaching and maybe 70% of your time doing management roles. There's also the need of improving compensation for that administrative role. I hope after that, or after this lecture, you'll be challenged to take up administrative role of training institutions. Then remember, we train you to be practitioners, researchers, administrators, and educators. Those are the 4 main areas we expect any graduate of this program to focus on. Of course, the world is open, it's a versatile world, you can adapt, but those are the 4 areas we train and groom you in. Just a few extra reference material you can read on, and that comes to the end of our session today. Till next time, goodbye.